started stenciling, you're going to need a few tools like a brayer, and I'm using my Botanical Study collection today, which I love. I'm also using some KRAFT cardstock. You can find this online or your big box stores. I like the thickness and the smooth finish to the paper for printing, and it's just something different other than white. I'll also be using some glazing liquid by Golden. This just keeps the acrylic paint open time longer, and I like the effects it gives me on the plate as well. I'm also using some fluid paint by Golden. I'll also use a couple heavy body paints and some KRAFT white paint by Apple Barrel that's a glossy finish. But any paint will do. And to begin, I place a piece of paper under my plate, and we'll talk about that later, and add a little bit of glazing medium to the plate. If you get too much, just mop a little bit off. I use it more for effect, but when I'm actually painting a lot or printing a lot, I really want my paint to stay wet, so then I can up the volume. I'm adding a little bit of QUINACRIDONE red, some green gold, some sap green, and then I always add a little bit of that budget-friendly white gloss paint onto the plate as well. I really start to brayer it around in chunks, and I like how this glazing medium, see the marks it makes? I love that. And that'll show up in our prints later. And then I start rolling my brayer around to really mix the paint up a bit. And I love the effects I get and the marks I get from doing this. I kind of keep my colors in chunks. I just really like the way this looks. And then I like to clean my brayer off in between hard passes of color, like from green to red, so I don't make a lot of mud. At the end, I will always kind of drag it over the area next to it. I just like that little bit of transparent layering. And then it's ready to get some stencils. So first I'm going to be using my stem stencil, and I love this. I'm putting it on at an angle because for filming purposes I'm using a little bit smaller plate, and then I'm lining my paper up with the sheet that's under my plate so I get a nice even pull in case I need to lay that page down again. Now what I'm getting by using this mask is an open or dead negative space, and I love that. And then I like to use deli paper to pull my ghost print because I really get some cool collage paper this way. So I'll pull a lot of the extra paint off my plate with this as I work today, and you'll see that. Now, when I pull the mask up, you can see it left some of the paint below it. I love this. I'll pull this as well, and then I'll keep layering to this sheet as I go. When I collage, this paper ends up being translucent, and I really love the look I get for this when I'm layering in my journals. Plus it dries pretty quickly. Now next, I'm going to leave that little bit of paint on my plate and lay my mask back down into the shadow of what was left and do another technique. Just line it up as best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. I like the little bit of edging I get if I'm just off center of where it was last time because I get a little bit of a shadow. Then I'll go ahead and layer a few more masks onto the plate. These are from the Botanical Wildflowers stencil and mask set, and I really love how they look kind of all layered together. They're very earthy. My favorite part of this collection was the organic look of the roots and stems. So I'm okay with layering mask over mask. It gives me some interesting texture when I'm printing. So I'm going to go ahead and add some of the white gloss paint to the plate, as well as a little bit of green gold, which is also a fluid paint, and then a little bit of a heavy-bodied quinacridone gold. The heavy body's a little bit harder to move around, but I like the texture I get. And then I'm just going to start brayering out the paint over the stencils and masks. until I get a nice chunky look. And I love it. You can see all of the different layers. And then I'm going to line my paper up again and pull the print. I just brayer it really well with my hands. You can use your brayer or a bone folder, whatever you like. I feel like I get the best reaction with my hands. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull the print. Again, I get a lot of neat negative space, but look at the texture and the depth I get with the light and dark because I've brayered over and left that white and gold paint kind of chunky in texture. Now I'm going to grab that deli paper and pull the ghost print again. I'm going to continue to layer this one piece. I usually work a piece of deli paper probably 5 or 10 times before I put it in my stash to use in my journal. I love how the masks start to look after I'm using them over and over. Now when I pull these up, there was no paint below them, but I will still get a ghost image of an outline of these masks from where the paint and the brayer moved around them. So I leave that on my plate for the next print. You could clean your plate fully if you like. I've added a little more white paint. I'm just going to brayer that all over those little shadow prints, keeping the paint pretty translucent and thin. And then I'm going to lay down another mask. This is the big one from the Wildflower mask and stencil set, which I love for all of the negative space it gives me at the bottom of the mask. Then I lightly brayer over the top and pull the print. Now I could do that with more. I could do it with color. I'm really enjoying the white on the KRAFT, and when I use a print I typically cut it up into smaller pieces, so I love the interesting details I get when I do that and all the spaces I have to add art marks and journaling. And you can see the cool outlines from where I didn't clean the plate from those little bit of the outline ghost images from the previous print. So my plate's pretty clean. I'm going to go ahead and ink it up again. I'm using the same colors throughout so you can see all the differences. Again with the QUINACRIDONE red. I'm also using some more sap green. That actually is the heavy bodied, not sap green, it's a QUINACRIDONE gold. And then I'm going to brayer it out. I like to keep my paint chunky. I don't typically blend the colors into one new color. I leave a little bit of each color showing. So this time I'm making the paint pretty translucent. And I'm going to layer a bunch of masks again. Because the paint is so thin for this technique, so translucent, it will dry much more quickly. So you could add a little bit of the glazing medium. I just like to work a little bit smaller. I'm going to lay the stem mask upside down just so I get the hint of it there. Now I'm going to take my brayer and just lightly, very lightly, brayer over the top of this. What it's doing is removing some of the paint, but I love the striped effect I'll get, and you'll see that in the final pull of the print. Now quickly pull the masks off. You can clean them in a minute, but for now I set them aside. And then I let this very thin layer dry. It's so translucent it won't take long to dry, and then I'll come back in with a layer of paint. Now that it's dry, I'm going to add some of the white gloss KRAFT paint, and I'm just going to brayer that around, again keeping it fairly translucent and even. A light touch works best if you want a thin thin layer of paint. I'm also going to use KRAFT paper again. I love how it looks with the white. I'm going to line it up to the paper that's underneath my plate and brayer it well. When the layers are really thin, I like to take extra time to brayer it because it doesn't always want to pull. I'm okay with the negative spaces. Some people don't like that, you may have to practice a little bit to see what your paint constitution favorite is. Now look at the beautiful stripes I get in this. I just love all the space and negative areas I get with these stencils and masks. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of heavy-bodied quinacridone magenta to the plate, along with some of the white craft paint. I'm also going to add a little bit more of that quinacridone gold, also a heavy body paint, and then sap green, which is a fluid paint, and once again the green gold, which is also fluid. The combination of the heavy body and fluid really make for interesting texture. So once again, I'll start blocking out the color, but not cleaning my brayer in between until I get to a very contrasting color. So I'm mixing the gold and the whites and the greens, keeping it kind of chunky. Again, I get that texture, and then I'm just going to barely tap my brayer off to clean it and pull that red into everything, getting those nice earthy, ruddy colors. You can see where the white paint left some circular marks underneath, as well as the green gold. I love that. Now this time I'm going to use the stem stencil. I'm putting it on at an angle on purpose so that I can get these interesting solid corners that I can either journal or make marks in. I'm going to use a white piece of computer paper, and I'm really going to burnish in the holes of that open stencil. Now, you'll want to have a wet wipe or a baby wipe or a damp cloth ready to clean your stencil off, because there's a lot of paint on my plate, and I want to make sure that I clean my stencil fairly quickly after doing this technique. So keep burnishing. This has a very delicate stem. It's my favorite part of this stencil, but it takes some extra burnishing. Now look at all the layers of color, the ombre effects, the lines that come into that, and the cool corners I get by leaving it. I could see this really being a neat starting page for doodling and journaling and art marking around. Don't forget to clean your stencil. The plate looks really cool, so I'll definitely pull a ghost print. Again, with the negative areas, I see lots of potential, not just for marks and words, but also for adding layers of paint in. Collage pieces, the ideas are endless. Once you start printing and incorporating the prints into your work, you'll see what I mean. So burnish the ghost print really well. Pull that up, and it helps to clean your plate. Really cool texture in the ghost prints. They're often my very favorite prints during a printing session. My plate is very old, so it has some divots and stuff in it from mark making, and to me that just adds to the texture. One final pull with my DELI sheet, and that way my plate is pretty clean for the next printing technique. So I'm going to once again add some quinacridone red. These are fluid paints. Some white gloss paint. I like the sheen this adds. A little more of the sap green. Pull in a little green gold. And ooh, a big dollop of the quinacridone gold. I'm just going to pull a little bit of that off and put it on my scrap sheet, and then kind of move it around with my finger into the areas I wanted. When you're using tube paint, it's easy to get too much, but you can apply it to the paint with your, the plate with your finger and move it around with your brayer. So first I'm going to take these heavy body paints. Now the brayer makes a lot of very interesting paint roll marks in the paint, which you'll notice in the finished prints as well. And then I'll start moving the rest of the colors together. I try to keep all of that texture. Do you see all that texture? I love it. And I'll block out my green, and then I'm going to keep moving that paint around to fill up the plate. Now by dragging the white out, you can see I get some really interesting texture on the entire plate. Almost looks like old wood or peeling paint, which I love. So this time I'm going to put the stencil onto the plate so it covers everything except the openings. No corners will show. You can see all the interesting colors coming through, and I'm once again going to burnish inside the stencil really well, paying special attention to those delicate stems and branches. And you can see it pretty well using the computer paper, which is why I demonstrated it this way. It's a little bit more difficult to see where you're burnishing on cardstock or lightweight or heavyweight printing paper, but it's worth extra attention. Just lift it up a little bit, and if it's not all the way burnished, you can go back in there. Now this one's got some beautiful lines and colors into it. Gorgeous. All right, I'm going to add some QUINACRIDONE magenta to the plate, heavy bodied. I'm also going to add a little bit of sap green and green gold. You can see I'm not afraid to add colors together that could easily make mud. I enjoy working around the plate this way and experimenting with color mixing. I've added some white. I have some of that extra QUINACRIDONE gold that I tapped off my finger on my brayer, so I'm going to take that and I'm going to start to mix all these colors at one time with my brayer. By using a light touch, I don't get too much mud, but I get a lot of marks and texture just with the paint. I'm going to add my big wildflower onto the plate with the stencil opening there, and I'm going to use a piece of the paper to burnish through. Now this stencil has a lot of delicate openings, like the other stencils on this, or the other openings on this stencil rather. I really like that. I know it's going to be a little bit trickier for us to use when we're burnishing, but the results are so worth it. Now when I'm working with a delicate stencil opening like this, I like to use my fingers to burnish because I can really feel out all of those small areas. And like I said, just take a peek and then go back. Look at the color variations. Gorgeous, so much depth and light and shadow. So I'll quickly clean my stencil and pull a ghost print because I wouldn't want to waste this lovely paint. Now I will use these ghost prints over and over too in the future. I'll keep turning the paper and pulling other plates, other prints from the plate with these until they're nice and juicy, and then I'll add them to the stack for my art journal. I love all the open space in this one. I see lots of lines and marks in my future. So here's some of the finished prints I used using these techniques. I really love the stripes and the variations of color the most. You can see I used the same 4 or 5 colors for the entire process, and I got a lot of different looks and feels, and if you could touch these pages, even textures, because of the way the paint was applied, either thin or thick. I love the ombre looks. So it is easy to get something that isn't uniform in color using a stencil. Here are some variations I used, putting 3 or 4 colors on the plate, and the one technique where we brayered right over the stencils, pulled them off, let the plate dry, added a layer of white, and re-pulled the print. These are all variations of that, and you can see all the different lines and bubbles of color and marks just from the paint that was on the plate previously. Even when I use brown to pull the print instead of white, I can use a white pen to doodle all of these areas. This was actually a ghost print. Tons of interesting depth in these. This one has 3 different stencil marks on it where I laid it out. This one has some string on the plate in addition to the stencils. I love that extra texture. More string, same technique on all of these. Paint on the plate, lay your stencils or masks down, brayer over them, pull them up, let the plate dry, add a layer of paint, pull the print over and over. And I can really see how these will shape up into some very interesting pages. Just changing your colors can change the look. Now my plate's old. Remember we talked about all the marks and divots in it. And if you use certain paint or there's any oil on your paint from cleaning it, you can really get some neat effects. These are from another day where I was using different colors, same techniques. Really, really love this stem. I think the combination of the delicate branches and the big drooping leaves, oh, I love it. Some more, oh, these are ghost prints. So negative space, less defined, super cool with my white pen. I can see a lot of lines and marks, penciling. I could journal inside those blocks. More ghost prints, ghost prints. I think the thing about the ghost prints I love is the texture. So this is one where I took one of my masks and I used a baby wipe to clean it right onto the page. So it did leave variations of the mask, but also kind of a crunchy feel when it dried from the wet baby wipe. Here's some more of those very basic prints where I can use a pen or pencil to fill in all of the negative space from the mask. I love all the variations of color and the marks that I get. This one is one of my favorites. It's very simplistic, but the texture, if you could see it in real life, is amazing. And this one as well. I love playing with color this way. Look at the little ghost outline that we talked about from laying the mask back down and then pulling it again. You can see that little shadow of an imprint from the time before. And then my DELI paper, which I keep using over and over. I just love it. It's going to be translucent when I glue it down in my journal, but it's going to be really cool. So I hope you enjoyed these techniques. There is so much to be done with stencils and masks, and I just know if you play around with them, you're going to find your own style, you're going to find what colors you love, you're going to find what techniques speak to you the most. So let me show you before we go how some of these turned out when I added those marks and lines we talked about. I usually use the negative space for lines, and I just love how they look all filled in. Just the repetitiveness, which is something I'm famous for. It's very calming, and as much as I love them as a whole, I know I talked about this before, but when these are cut up, you're gonna start to see a lot of detail in them that you didn't recognize as a whole. So grab your white pen or your pencil, your Sharpie, whatever your go-to mark maker is, and start filling in. This one I just filled in around all of the masks instead of actually outlining the negative space. Here's what these stencils look like, just pounced through with paint. Very simplistic, but botanical in nature, so you could add them in a traditional way to your paintings and journal as well. And here they are as masks, and of course as my favorite beautiful texturized ghost print. The big stem, just pounced through with paint, again as a mask, the masks allowing you to have all of that negative space. The ghost print and another ghost print. So I think you can see if you bring out your favorite pens, you'll find what you love to do. You can just make marks, filling in around, even a ghost print, or you can actually draw lines around the edges or fill in the negative space. You can brighten up all of your prints with your own unique marks this way and take them to the next level. You can have the layering of the masks and stencil like here, which I love. Don't forget about blocks of color. They make your prints really interesting. So have fun and happy stenciling.